The leather portfolio had been sitting on my desk for 3 days, squarely centered on the dark walnut surface, as if it had every right to occupy the exact place where my hands usually rested at the beginning and end of each working day. And for 3 days I had moved around it, the way a man moves around a coffin in a room full of people who are pretending it is only a box. It was not large. That was the first thing that kept bothering me. 42 years of work. Whether payroll loans, job site injuries, lawsuits, permits, union negotiations, hurricanes, market collapses, steel shortages, concrete delays, and all the long years when I drove home after midnight with dust in my hair and a number in my head that could either keep the company alive or kill it by Frid. All of that had been reduced to a leather folder no thicker than my thumb. My attorney had done beautiful work. Every page was crisp. Every clause was polished. The transition documents had been reviewed by 3 firms, sealed by 2 tax specialists, checked twice by my estate attorney, and arranged with the kind of precision that makes wealthy men feel calm when they are signing away control. It was all there. Hargrave & Sons Construction, 11 offices across 4 states, 430 employees, bonding lines that smaller companies only dream about, active contracts with hospitals, universities, municipal authorities, private developers, and 1 aviation authority that had nearly aged me 5 years during the negotiation process. All of it waiting for my signature and my son's signature, and the kind of ceremonial handoff families like mine are supposed to turn into a dinner, a toast, a photograph, and a story people can tell later when the dangerous parts have already been forgot. I kept walking past it, touching the cover with 2 fingers, then walking away again, and each time I touched it I felt something that was not exactly pride and not exactly relief. It felt closer to surrender. It felt like standing in front of a building I had framed myself, and realizing someone else was about to move in with different furniture, different lighting, different habits, and I would still be allowed to visit, maybe even advise, but I would no longer be able to walk through the rooms and say this beam is wrong, this wall is load B. Ring, do not cut there unless you want the whole thing to shift. I was 63 years old, and 63 is not old in the way young people think old age looks, but it is old enough for a man to understand that his knees have started telling the truth before his pride does. My left knee ached every morning before rain. My right hand stiffened if I held a pen too long. My doctor, who was younger than my oldest project manager, and had the careful, cheerful cruelty of men who jog before sunrise, had been nudging me toward retirement for 2 years. He never said the word as a command. He said it like a suggestion wrapped in concern. Richard, he would say, you have built something extraordinary. Now you have to decide whether you want to enjoy it or die inside it. He thought that was wisdom. Maybe it was. I always answered with some version of I will slow down soon. And he always looked at me over his glasses, the way people look at old contractors who have promised to retire every year since 2009. The truth was simpler than I wanted to admit. I did not know how to stop building. I knew how to measure, how to bid, how to read a person lying across a conference table, how to calm a foreman before he threw a superintendent through a drywall opening, how to walk a half-finished site and hear trouble in the rhythm of work before anyone reported it. I knew how to carry responsibility until it stopped feeling heavy. I knew how to show up. I did not know how to be the man who used to show up. My son, Daniel, was the reason I had finally let the attorneys prepare the portfolio. My firstborn, the boy I took to job sites before he could read, the boy who had worn a tiny yellow hard hat in the photograph I still kept on my desk, standing beside me in a muddy lot with one hand raised in a salute he had copied from a cartoon soldier. In the photo, his boots were too klein, his cheeks were red from cold, and he was looking at me instead of the camera. That mattered more to me than I ever told him. I had looked at that photo for 30 years and seen not only the child he had been, but the promise I had made without saying it aloud. One day, if he wanted it, he would have a place in what I built, not because his name matched mine, not because blood alone qualifies anyone to carry steel and debt and people's livelihoods, but because I believed work could be inherited if the child respected the work more than the inheritance. Daniel had grown into a capable man, not perfect. No son is perfect, and no father sees clearly enough to measure his own child without distortion. He had my jaw and his mother's restraint, which meant his anger rarely came out hot. It collected behind his eyes and became silence. He was good with numbers, better than I had been at his age. He could sit with developers and make them feel understood, while quietly moving them toward terms that favored us. He knew scheduling software, labor analytics, and the modern language of efficiency. He respected our older crews, at least in public, and that had counted for a lot with me. He had made mistakes, some expensive, but never the same one twice. He had married Elise 6 years earlier, and I had believed, with the mild caution of a widower trying not to become hard, that he had chosen well. Elise was elegant without appearing vain, educated without making a room feel tested, warm in the controlled way people can be warm when they know exactly how long to hold a smile. She remembered birthdays. She sent flowers on the anniversary of my wife's death every year. She asked about my blood pressure. She called me Richard in a soft voice, never Dad, never Mr. Hargrave, and there was something about that balance that made me think she understood boundaries. I mistook polish for steadiness. I mistook controlled emotion for honesty. I mistook a woman's ability to make everyone comfortable for kindness. That was my failure, and I do not decorate it now with excuses. My wife, Evelyn, would have seen more than I did. I know that now, and I knew it then in a way I refused to examine. She had been gone 11 years, and grief, after 11 years, does not stand in the center of the room screaming. It becomes part of the room. It becomes the empty chair you stop looking at directly. It becomes the second cup you no longer reach for. It becomes a silence with habits. Evelyn had loved the backfield behind our house, the slope of it, the line of oaks along the fence, the way morning light came up slowly as if the world were being reconsidered one blade of grass at a time. On the Thursday morning before the dinner, I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee cooling in my hand and watched that light settle across the field. And for one stupid, ordinary second, I turned my head to say something to her. Not something important, nothing dramatic, just that the frost had come early, or that the oaks had held their leaves longer than usual. My mouth had already shaped the first word before I remembered. There is a particular kind of loneliness that only other widowers understand, the kind that does not always hurt sharply, but humiliates you with its repetition. You can be a man who runs a billion-dollar company and still be defeated by the instinct to tell your dead wife about the weather. I stood there longer than I should have, coffee cooling, portfolio waiting in the study, Saturday approaching like a bridge I had already built but did not yet trust. My phone buzzed on the counter, and the screen lit with Daniel's name. Dad, can't wait for Saturday. This means everything to me. I read it twice. I smiled, because fathers are trained by love to smile before they think. Then I set the phone face down. If Evelyn had been there, she would have asked why I did not answer. She always noticed hesitation. She would have looked at my face, then at the phone, then back at me and said, Richard, what are you not saying? I would have told her something vague. She would have waited me out. She was better at silence than I was. Instead, the kitchen stayed empty, and I went through the morning with a strange tenderness in my chest, the kind that makes a man sentimental and therefore vulnerable. I had a full day ahead, the kind of day that used to be my entire life and now had begun to feel like a series of farewell tour disguised as work. A walkthrough at the downtown renovation project, lunch with my foreman of 20 years, then a stop at the jeweler on Clement Street to pick up the bracelet I had commissioned for Elise. The downtown project was a 14-story conversion of an old insurance building into residential and retail, a nightmare of hidden asbestos, warped floor plates, and preservation requirements written by people who had never tried to install modern HVAC in a building designed before anyone cared where air came from. I loved that kind of project despite myself. New construction is cleaner, but renovations are more honest. A building that has been standing for 80 years does not flatter you. It shows you every bad decision made by every man before you and waits to see whether you are arrogant enough to add your own. I walked the site that morning with Louis Morneau, my foreman, who had been with me long enough to insult me without fear. He complained about the revised elevator drawings, the city inspector, the subcontractor who had sent 3 apprentices and no one who knew which end of a level to hold. I listened, asked questions, climbed 2 flights of temporary stairs I had no business climbing, and pretended not to notice Louis watching my knee. We stood on the 7th floor with plastic sheeting snapping in the wind where windows would eventually be, and he said, Saturday is the big night, right? I looked at him. He had concrete dust on one sleeve, and the expression of a man trying to sound casual around something that mattered. I said yes. He nodded and looked out across the city. Daniel ready? I told him I believed so. Lewis did not answer immediately. That silence stayed with me later. At the time, I thought he was simply weighing loyalty. He had watched Daniel grow up through company picnics and summer internships, and those early years when Daniel wore clean boots to dirty places, because he had not yet learned that respect begins at the soles. Lewis finally said he has the head for it. I asked what he meant by leaving out the rest. Lewis shrugged. Some men have the head for the job before they have the stomach. Sometimes the stomach comes. Sometimes it doesn't. I should have asked more. I should have listened harder. But fathers have a habit of treating warnings about their children as weather reports from another county. The jeweler's shop was tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore I had been promising myself I would enter for at least 5 years. Clement Street had changed since I first knew it. The old hardware store was now a cafe with hanging plants and an espresso machine that hissed like a hydraulic line. The repair shop where I used to buy work gloves was a boutique selling candles named after emotions. I parked my truck in a loading zone because old habits do not die just because a street gets polished, checked my watch and went inside. The woman behind the counter recognized me immediately. People often did, though not always for the reasons they thought. Sometimes they knew the company name. Sometimes they knew a building we had put up. Sometimes they had seen my photograph in a business journal profile that described me as reclusive, which made me laugh because I had spent my life surrounded by noise. She brought the box out without my asking, and when she opened it, the bracelet lay against dark velvet like a small promise. Gold, not too heavy, engraved inside with the company's founding date and Elise's initials, M.H. Because she had taken Daniel's name, and because I had wanted the gesture to say something I was not good at saying aloud. You belong here. You are not only my son's wife. You are part of what comes next. The engraving was clean and exact. I turned the bracelet in the light, imagining Elise opening it on Saturday, her eyes softening, Daniel watching, the portfolio beside the wine, the next chapter beginning with dignity instead of ceremony. It is painful now to remember how sincere I was. Not foolish in the cartoon way of men who ignore everything, but sincerely hopeful. There is a difference. I closed the box and slipped it into my coat pocket, thanked the jeweler, and pushed open the door back onto the sidewalk. The air outside had warmed. A city bus sighed at the curb. A delivery driver argued with someone on a headset while balancing 3 boxes against his hip. My phone rang before I reached the truck. I did not recognize the number. Local area code, no name. Usually I let those go to voicemail, because at my age, every unknown call is either a scam, a survey, or someone pretending to be from a bank that already has too much information about you. But my thumb moved before my judgment did. Some instinct I could not name made me answer. Is this Richard Hargrave? The voice was a woman's, low and careful, not nervous exactly, but deliberate, as if each word had been selected in advance and placed gently because dropping one might set off an alarm. It is, I said. Who's calling? There was a pause, and in that pause the street seemed to recede. I could still see the bus, the driver, the woman with a paper coffee cup crossing against the light, but all of it seemed farther away. The woman said, someone who has worked in your building for a long time. I cannot tell you my name. I am sorry, but I need you to check your email before Saturday. Your personal email, not the company one. I sent you 3 files. Please read all of them before you sign anything. I stopped walking. The bracelet box felt suddenly heavy in my pocket. What kind of files? Documents, she said. Ones you were never supposed to see. I asked who gave them to her. The line went quiet. I asked again, softer this time, because I could hear her breathing and knew she was still there. She said, Mr. Hargrave, I have worked near powerful men for a long time, and I know the difference between a mistake and a plan. Please read the files. Then the call ended. Not gradually, not with a goodbye. It simply went dead, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the phone still pressed to my ear, while the city moved around me as if nothing had shifted. A woman with a stroller went around me with a polite little irritation in her mouth. The bus pulled away from the curb. A horn sounded half a block down. I lowered the phone slowly and looked at the blank screen. The whole thing had taken less than a minute. That is how some betrayals arrive, not with slammed doors or shouting or a confession under pressure, but with a stranger's careful voice and a sentence that breaks the floor under your life. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes before I opened my email. I remember the exact way my hands felt on the steering wheel, dry and faintly cold, though the cab was warm. I remember the crack in the black vinyl near the dashboard vent, and the little half-circle of dust gathered where I never cleaned properly. I remember looking through the windshield at a man walking a dog, the dog stopping to sniff a lamppost with complete moral seriousness, and thinking absurdly that whatever was in those files, the dog did not care. The world has a cruelty in its indifference. It does not dim the sun because your life has tilted. I opened my personal email. There it was, an anonymous address, no subject line, no message in the body, 3 PDF attachments. The first was a loan document, and for several seconds my mind refused to assemble the parts into meaning. Elise's full legal name was at the top, along with a private lending firm I had never heard of, an address in Nevada, and a figure that made my eyes stop. $480, $0. Not a mortgage, not a business line, not an investment note with reasonable collateral. A private loan 18 months old, with an interest rate so predatory that even before I reached the collateral section, I understood she had not borrowed from a lender. She had borrowed from hunger. The collateral listed was described as anticipated inheritance and transferred business asset. Anticipated inheritance. The words sat there with a clean legal blandness that made them worse. I set the phone down on the passenger seat and looked out the windshield. The dog walker had turned the corner. A child in a blue jacket was drawing something with chalk on a driveway across the street, bent over with the total concentration children give to temporary things. I watched the child draw a yellow sun with long straight rays. I picked up the phone again and opened the second file. It was a series of emails between Daniel and Elise, printed and scanned, some with headers intact, some forwarded, some clipped in ways that suggested whoever had gathered them had done so carefully but not easily. I read every word once, then again, because the first reading was only impact and the second was injury. The oldest email was dated 14 months earlier. Elise had written, "The loan comes due in February. We need the transfer done before then. Once it is in your name, we can restructure." Daniel had replied with 3 words, "Working on it, working on it." That phrase did something to me that the dollar figure had not. Money is numbers. Debt can be solved. But those 3 words were intimate. They had rhythm. They implied ongoing effort, shared strategy, a problem being managed behind my back with the same calm urgency we used in the company when weather threatened a pour or a permit stalled a start date. Working on it. My son had looked at my life, my timing, my trust, my living body sitting across from him in meetings, and turned me into a task. I had to set the phone down again. My breath had started moving strangely, too high in my chest. I pressed both palms flat against my thighs, and breathed the way my doctor had taught me after an incident 3 years earlier, when stress had driven my blood pressure into numbers he called theatrical. In through the nose, hold, out slowly, again, again. I remember thinking, not now, not here. A man can receive terrible news and still be embarrassed by the possibility of a stranger seeing him fall apart in a parked truck. Outside, the child kept drawing. A yellow sun, a house, a stick figure with hair standing straight up. I opened the 3rd file. 1 page. A summary document written in Elise's handwriting, scanned cleanly enough that I could see the pressure of her pen. At the top, underlined twice, were the words post-transfer plan. Below that, bullet points: refinance selected company assets, relocate main office functions to Charlotte within 24 months, consolidate regional management, reduce legacy overhead, evaluate Richard's advisory role. 1 line stopped me completely. R can stay on as consultant if he wants. Non-voting. R, not dad, not Richard, not founder, not chairman, not the man who had taken calls in hospital waiting rooms and signed personal guarantees in the years when the company was too young to survive mistakes. R, my name reduced to an initial in a document about what would happen to my life's work after my son and daughter-in-law used my trust to get control of it. There are injuries you feel immediately, sharp and hot. This was not that. This was cold. It entered slowly and settled deep. It did not make me want to shout. It made the inside of the truck feel airless. I sat there for a very long time, and the bracelet in my coat pocket seemed to burn through the fabric. I did not call Daniel. That was the first decision I made, though at the time it felt less like a decision and more like a hand closing around my throat from the inside. The father in me wanted to call him immediately, to demand an explanation, to give him a chance to say the files were wrong, misunderstood, incomplete, stolen, doctored, anything. The builder in me knew better. You do not swing a hammer at a wall because you smell rot. You open it carefully. You find the studs. You trace the water. You learn whether the damage is cosmetic or structural before you touch anything that holds weight. I did not call Elise either, though a separate part of me, a colder part I did not like, wanted to hear her voice while she still believed I knew nothing. I drove home. I do not remember the drive clearly. I remember stopping at a red light and seeing a couple laughing in the car beside me. I remember my hands at 10 and 2, like I was 17 again, taking a driving test. I remember pulling into my driveway and seeing the back field, the house, the garage, the oak tree, all of it exactly as it had been that morning, which felt offensive. I changed into old work clothes and went to the garage, because I needed to do something with my hands before my thoughts turned into something I could not manage. I had a workbench out there, half-finished cabinets for a neighbor I had promised months ago. Maple, plain grain, simple design. Work that did not care about inheritance, only measurement. I clamped a board, took up the hand plane and began. The first pass came off ragged because my pressure was uneven. I stopped, reset my stance and tried again. Long curl of pale wood. Again, the motion began to steady me. The body remembers order when the mind cannot. Plain clear check. Plain clear check. My shoulders began to burn. Sweat gathered under the collar of my shirt. I worked until the floor was littered with shavings, and the late afternoon light had moved from the window to the concrete near my boots. Once I thought of Evelyn so suddenly that my hand slipped, and the blade caught too deep, gouging the edge of the board. I set the plane down and stared at the mark. It looked like what I felt, a clean surface made ugly by one uncontrolled pass. I am not a man who cries easily. That is not a boast. It may not even be a virtue. I learned it from my father, who believed emotions were things a man paid for privately. He was not cruel. He was steady, and he showed love by repairing what was broken before anyone else noticed. He showed up every day without fail. That was his language, and I inherited it fluently. I had shown up for Daniel his entire life. Job sites and baseball games, parent conferences and college orientation. The night he called from his dorm bathroom because he had failed an exam and thought his life was over. The morning he signed his first employment agreement with the company and tried to act professional while I could see his hands trembling. I had shown up at his wedding, where Evelyn's absence had been so large that for a moment before walking down the aisle, I had nearly stepped outside to breathe. I had never missed anything that mattered, and now I understood that while I was showing up, someone else had been building a different plan entirely. A plan with timelines, collateral, debt maturity, relocation notes, and a neat little place for me as a non-voting consultant in the ruins of my own authority. I wanted to hate him for it. It would have been easier if I could. But love, real love, the kind that has held a child with fever and watched that child become a man, does not vanish on command. It becomes pain. It becomes self-interrogation. It becomes an old man standing in a garage at dusk, trying to decide whether betrayal counts less if the betrayer is frightened. I told myself Daniel was not a bad person. I said it aloud once, and the sound of my own voice in the garage startled me. He is not a bad person. The sentence echoed badly, not because it was false, but because it was insufficient. He was a man who had married a woman with a serious financial problem, and had apparently decided that the solution was to take what was already going to be his, only faster, only cleaner, only while I was still alive but emotionally useful enough to sign. I understood the logic even as it broke something in me. The logic did not make it acceptable. The logic made it worse. As for Elise, I found myself thinking of her in layers. The Elise who sent flowers on Evelyn's anniversary. The Elise who stood in my kitchen helping clear plates after Thanksgiving, laughing softly at one of Daniel's stories. The Elise who called private debt collateralized by anticipated inheritance. The Elise whose handwriting was careful, elegant, and calm under the words R can stay on as consultant if he wants. I thought about the loan, $480, $0 with an interest rate that would keep multiplying until money became threat. She had gotten herself into real trouble. Not an inconvenience, not embarrassment, trouble, and that was another knife. Because if she had come to me, if Daniel had brought her into my study and said, "Dad, we made a mistake, we need help," I would have written the check. Not joyfully, not without questions, but I would have written it. I would have called Gerald. I would have structured the payoff. I would have protected the company, protected Daniel, protected her from whatever wolves she had invited to the door. I might have been stern, I might have been hurt, but I would not have let her drown. That was what I could not move past. Not the money, not even the attempt, the choice. There had been another road, a shorter, honest road, one I had built for my son over decades by saying in every possible way, "When something breaks, come to me before it collapses." They had stood at that road and turned away. Friday became an exercise in appearing ordinary, and I learned that ordinary behavior can become its own kind of violence when you are doing it over a wound. I woke at 5:30 because I always do, made coffee, read headlines without absorbing a single word, and dressed for the office in a navy suit Daniel once told me made me look like I was about to fire a bank. The portfolio remained on my desk. I looked at it before leaving, then left it there. At headquarters, the receptionist smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Hargrave," and I said good morning with a voice so normal it made me feel fraudulent. People came in and out of my office all morning. A regional manager needed approval on a staffing shift. Finance wanted confirmation on a bonding renewal. A project executive from Phoenix called to complain about steel delivery delays, as if the world had not ended in 3 PDFs. I answered everything. I signed 2 routine documents and noticed the way my signature looked, confident and automatic, the same signature Daniel expected on Saturday. Around 10, I passed accounts receivable and saw Miriam Alvarez at her desk. Miriam had been with the company for 19 years. She had known Evelyn. She had brought soup to the house after the funeral and left without trying to talk, which I had appreciated more than anything anyone said that week. She was in her late 50s, neat, quiet, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that missed very little. She looked up as I passed, and for half a second there was something in her face. Not fear, not guilt, something braced. Then she looked back at her monitor. I kept walking. I did not know if she had made the call. I had no proof. I only knew that the anonymous woman had said she had worked in my building for a long time, and that Miriam had always held loyalty like a private religion. At noon, I met my attorney, Nathan Price, for lunch at a downtown restaurant where the waiters know which people are there to be seen and which people are there because the booths are private. Nathan had prepared the transition portfolio. He was younger than Gerald but sharp, thorough, and almost offensively calm. He asked if I was ready for Saturday. I looked at him across the table and considered telling him everything. Instead, I asked questions about tax consequences and board structure and the timing of public announcement. He answered with precision, occasionally tapping the table with one finger when making a point. I watched his mouth move and thought, I should stop this right now. I should tell him to freeze it all, cancel the dinner, call Daniel into a conference room with witnesses. But some part of me needed one more day to think, while the original plan remained alive on the surface. That was denial, though I did not call it that then. I called it prudence. Men like me are skilled at giving fear professional names. After lunch, I went to the grocery store and bought steaks for Saturday. I stood in front of the butcher case choosing ribeyes, as if meat selection mattered. The butcher asked how many. I said 3, then changed it to 4 out of habit, because Evelyn always told me to make extra. The moment I said 4, I felt the old missing place open beside me. I bought asparagus, potatoes, salad greens, and a bottle of red wine Daniel liked. I bought a lemon tart because Elise once said she preferred tart desserts to sweet ones. Even knowing what I knew, I bought the dessert she liked. That detail shames me more than I expected, not because kindness was wrong, but because habit kept serving people my judgment no longer trusted. That evening I called my daughter, Anna, who lived in Portland, and could not make the dinner because of a grant review at the university where she worked. Anna had never wanted the company. She loved it in the abstract, respected it, defended it when classmates made jokes about construction money, but she had Evelyn's hunger for books and policy and complicated causes that paid badly and mattered deeply. We spoke for 23 minutes. I know because I looked afterward. She told me about a student project, about rain, about her oldest child refusing to wear anything but red socks. I asked more questions than usual because I did not want her to hear what was under my voice. At one point she paused and said, "Dad, are you all right?" I almost told her. I almost said, "Your brother has done something," and I do not know yet how much of him is still the boy you grew up with." Instead, I said I was tired. She accepted it reluctantly. Before hanging up, she said, "Saturday will be emotional for you. Let yourself feel that." I smiled into the empty kitchen. I said I would try. After the call, I stood for a long time with the phone in my hand. I was grateful she would not be there. I did not want her to see what Saturday might become. I did not want Daniel to be humiliated in front of his sister. Even then, before I had decided fully what to do, I was protecting him from the full consequences of being seen. At 8:10 that night, I called Gerald Whitcomb. Gerald had been my company's outside counsel for decades before he retired, and more importantly, he was the sort of man you call when the legal issue is only half the problem and the other half is whether your soul will survive the decision you are about to make. He answered with the television loud in the background and immediately turned it down. "Richard," he said, in the voice of a man who knew calls after 8 from me were never social. I asked if he could talk. He said yes. I told him everything, beginning with the unknown call and ending with the handwritten post-transfer plan. I read him phrases from the documents, because saying them aloud made them real in a way reading had not. Anticipated inheritance. Working on it. Non-voting. Gerald did not interrupt. He had a gift for silence that was not empty but active. When I finished, he said, "Do you believe the files are authentic?" I said yes. He asked if Daniel knew I had them. I said no. He asked what I wanted. I hated the question. I told him I wanted my options. He said that was not the same thing. I said I knew. He talked for 40 minutes. Legal exposure, fiduciary concerns, transition risk, debt payoff structures, post-nuptial agreements, trust mechanisms, independent board oversight, revocation of prepared documents, emergency amendments. He spoke not as a man seeking revenge, but as a man building containment around a fire. I took notes on a yellow legal pad, the same kind I had used since I was 21. By the time we hung up, I had a shape in my mind. Not revenge. I want to be precise about that. Revenge is heat. It wants spectacle. It wants the other person to feel pain. What formed in me that night was colder and more durable. Clarity. I was going to make the truth visible, not to the world, not to the employees, not to honor, but to the 2 people who had hidden it from me. Then I was going to build a wall no one could breach. Saturday came the way all difficult days come, with ordinary light through ordinary windows and birds making ordinary noise in the oak tree by the driveway. I had slept 3 hours. At 4:20, I gave up pretending and went downstairs. The house felt too large. It had always been too large after Evelyn died, but that morning the emptiness had an accusation in it. I made coffee. I read the news again without reading. I took the bracelet box out of my coat pocket and set it beside the portfolio. Then after 5 minutes put it in a drawer because I could not bear the sight of it. Around 9, I drove into town to meet Gerald in person. He had come out of retirement for the morning with the reluctant energy of a man who claimed to hate legal work and still dressed for it perfectly. We met in his home office, where framed diplomas had faded unevenly in the sun. He had already drafted a revised structure overnight, a management trust, incremental ownership transfer tied to performance over 10 years, independent advisory board, restrictions on refinancing company asset, debt payoff agreement for Elise, contingent on a postnuptial separation of company assets from personal liabilities, a written acknowledgement from Daniel that the immediate transfer documents were void, and that no ownership interest had been conveyed. Gerald slid the papers across to me and watched me read every line. There are men who want their lawyers to tell them what to do. I have never been that man. I read. I asked. I crossed out one sentence and rewrote it by hand because it sounded too punitive. Gerald noticed. "You are still protecting him," he said. I did not look up. "He is still my son." Gerald leaned back. "Yes, and you are still alive. Make sure he understands both facts." I signed nothing that morning. I took the drafts home in a plain folder and placed it on the chair beside my dining room seat, hidden from immediate view. Then I began preparing dinner. Cooking before a confrontation is a strange act. It forces tenderness into the same hours as judgment. I seasoned steaks, washed potatoes, trimmed asparagus, set the table with Evelyn's white plates, and chose the silverware we used on anniversaries because some stubborn part of me wanted the evening to remain dignified even if it became terrible. I opened the wine early to let it breathe. I arranged candles because Elise liked candles, and because Evelyn always said overhead light made food look tired. Every domestic gesture felt loaded. The plates said family, the portfolio said legacy, the folder said betrayal. At 5:40, I showered and changed into a charcoal sweater and dark trousers. My hands shook once while buttoning my cuff, and I stood still until they stopped. At 5:58, headlights appeared through the front windows. Daniel always arrived 2 minutes early when he was nervous. I watched their car come up the drive, and for a moment, through the glass, I saw not a man and a woman arriving to receive a company, but my boy coming home from college for Thanksgiving, Evelyn running to the door before pretending she had not been waiting. Memory is cruelest when it arrives carrying love. I opened the door before they rang. Daniel smiled too quickly. Elise stepped forward with a bottle of wine and that warm, practiced face of hers. "Richard," she said, "you look wonderful." She embraced me. Her perfume was clean and expensive. I felt her arms around my shoulders and thought, did you already know then, when you ordered the lender, when you wrote my initial, when you looked at my son and said we need the transfer done before February? I said, kind of you to say. Daniel hugged me next, harder than usual. Maybe guilt has weight and needs pressure to hide it. Dinner began almost beautifully, which made everything worse. Daniel talked about a hospital project in Utah and asked good questions about a subcontractor dispute. Elise asked about my knee, then about Anna's children, then about the back field, which she said looked peaceful from the dining room window. She played her role flawlessly, not falsely exactly. That was the unsettling part. Her concern for my knee may have been real. Her admiration of the field may have been real. Her participation in the plan was also real. Human beings are terrible because they are rarely one thing at a time. During salad, Daniel glanced at the portfolio. Once, then again. The second glance was almost invisible. Just the quick pull of his eyes to the leather cover at the head of the table. Elise did not look at it at all. She talked about a charity auction and sliced her lettuce into pieces so precise they looked measured. That told me something. She had trained herself not to look at what she wanted. She had rehearsed. I listened to them speak and felt the pressure rise under my ribs. There were moments when I almost stopped it too early. When Daniel laughed at something I said, and sounded exactly like himself at 17. When Elise passed me the salt before I asked, because she knew my habits. When the wine softened the light, and the house briefly pretended to be safe. Each partial release made the next wave heavier. By the time I cleared the plates, my body felt as if I had been carrying lumber all day. I brought out the steaks, and Daniel complimented them too quickly. Elise said the lemon tart smelled wonderful from the kitchen. I looked at her and thought, I bought that for you after reading what you wrote about me. She smiled, unaware of the sentence inside my silence. After the plates were cleared, and the wine sat low in the bottle, the room entered that ceremonial hush people create before asking for something already expected. Daniel sat straighter. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, set it carefully beside his plate, and looked at me with an expression I had seen in boardrooms when men wanted to appear humble in front of money. "Dad," he said, "I just want to say this means everything to us." His voice caught slightly on us, and Elise lowered her gaze at the perfect angle. "I know how much you put into this company. I know what it cost you. I know what Mom gave up too. I won't let you down." He stopped, swallowed, and looked at the portfolio. I wanted to believe him so badly that for 1 second I almost did. He meant some of it. That is the hell of it. He meant his love for the company. He meant that he admired me. He meant that he wanted to lead well. And he had also worked on a plan to move my life's work faster than I intended, because his wife's debt had become a clock ticking behind their marriage. People are complicated in exactly the wrong ways at exactly the wrong times. And I have never been able to fully hate someone I love even when I have every reason to. I looked at my son for a long moment, his face, my jaw, Evelyn's eyes when he was tired. I said, "I know you won't." Elise's shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Then I reached down to the chair beside me, lifted the plain folder, and set it on the table between the candles and the wine bottle. I did not open it. I simply let it sit there. "A few days ago," I said, "I received some document. I will not say how, and I will not say from whom, but I read them very carefully, and I want to give you both the opportunity to tell me the truth before this dinner goes any further." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have heard in years. It did not arrive all at once, it spread. Daniel's face lost color from the mouth outward. Elise's expression did not change for 2 full seconds, and those 2 seconds told me more about her than any confession could have. A startled, innocent person reacts before strategy arrives. Elise's stillness was not innocence. It was recalculation. I watched it move through her eyes. Inventory, risk, probability, damage control. Then she looked at Daniel, and Daniel looked at the folder. "Dad," he started. His voice came out rough. I raised one hand. "I am not angry," I said, which was not true, but anger was too small a word for what I was carrying. "I am asking you to be honest with me right now. Whatever happens after that, I will deal with, but I will not sign anything tonight or any other night until I hear the truth from you." Daniel stared at the folder as if it might open by itself. Elise folded her hands in her lap. I could see her thumb press into the side of her index finger hard enough to whiten the skin. "Richard," she said softly, "I am not sure what you think you have seen." There it was, the first move. Not denial, not confession. Fog. I looked at her. "Elise, do not do that." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do," I said. "And if you make me open this folder and read your own words back to you, something will happen in this room that none of us can undo. So I am asking you, not as a negotiator, not as the owner of the company, but as the man whose table you are sitting at, to decide whether you want to begin this conversation with one more lie." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Elise's mouth tightened. That was the first crack. The next hour was painful in the way only intimate betrayals can be, because no one in that room was a stranger, and every sentence had history attached to it. Daniel spoke first, though not immediately. He stood once, walked to the window, then came back because there was nowhere useful to go. "He told me about the loan. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Confession does not come out like a report when shame is involved. It comes in fragments, corrections, backtracking, phrases like it was not supposed to happen, and we thought we had more time, and I know how this sounds. He told me Elise had made a real estate investment before they married, a private redevelopment deal through a friend of a friend, the kind of supposedly safe opportunity that flatters people by inviting them into a room they should have been suspicious of entering. The deal had gone badly, then worse, then someone had offered bridge financing, then the bridge had turned into a trap." Elise sat very still while he spoke, only interrupting when he made something sound smaller than it had been. "No," she said once, "that part was my decision." Another time she said, "Daniel did not know the interest rate at first." That surprised me, not because it absolved her, but because it showed a kind of grim honesty beginning to emerge under pressure. Daniel admitted that when he learned the full amount, he panicked. He did not use that word until I supplied it. He said he was worried, then afraid, then desperate. I said, "You panicked." He looked at me, and for the first time that night he looked young. "Yes, I panicked." He said they had considered telling me. He said it more than once, as if the consideration itself deserved credit. "We almost came to you," he said. I asked when. He rubbed both hands over his face. "Around Christmas, then again in March, then after the lender sent the revised notice." I said, "And each time you chose not to." He nodded. I said, "Why?" Elise answered before he did. "Because I was ashamed." Her voice was quieter than I expected. Not theatrical, not the polished voice from charity lunches. It had a bare edge to it. She looked at the table, not at me. "I was ashamed before I met Daniel, and after I married him it got worse because everyone thought I had become safe. Your family is safe. Your company is safe. Daniel is safe. I kept thinking I could fix it before anyone knew. Then fixing it became borrowing, and borrowing became hiding, and hiding became planning. And by the time I understood what I had done, I had already made Daniel part of it." Daniel said, "Elise." She shook her head, "No." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were wet but steady. "I am not going to hide behind him. I did that long enough. The debt is mine. The first lie was mine. The pressure I put on him was mine. But he made his own choices after that. I watched Daniel absorb that. It hurt him, and I thought good, then hated myself for thinking it. I asked her for the exact figure. She gave it. Principal, interest, penalties. The total had grown beyond the original amount into something close to $620. $0 if carried to February. I asked who held the note. She named the firm. Gerald had warned me about that firm the night before. They specialized in wealthy families, not because wealthy families always paid, but because wealthy families feared embarrassment. Elise described calls, letters, a man showing up at an event and standing where she could see him, not threatening, not openly, but smiling as if he already knew which doors were unlocked. Daniel reached for her hand. She let him take it after a second, and I watched the two of them connected by fear they had chosen over honesty. Then I asked the question I had been saving, because I knew the answer would decide how much of my heart remained intact. Elise, I said, and she looked at me. I need a truthful answer. Did you come into this family with this plan already made? Or did the plan come later after the debt got worse? Daniel turned sharply toward her, as if he had not considered that I might ask it, or maybe as if he had considered it and been afraid to hear the answer. Elise's face changed. The control left it slowly. She looked older in that moment, not physically, but morally, as if the version of herself she had been performing had finally stepped aside and left the person underneath unprotected. She took a breath. Later, she said, "After, I believed her. I do not know if that made it better or worse. If she had married Daniel as a strategy, I could have hated her cleanly. If the plan had come later, then the marriage had been real before fear colonized it. That meant the damage had not been born monstrous. It had grown. It had found soil in silence, shame, pride, and Daniel's willingness to confuse inheritance with entitlement. That is harder to hate because it resembles ordinary human weakness, and ordinary human weakness is terrifying precisely because it can live in people you love. I looked at Daniel. He was crying silently, which I had not seen since his mother's funeral. I did not comfort him. That may sound cruel. Maybe it was, but there are moments when comforting someone too quickly is just another way of helping them avoid the full shape of what they have done. I told them what I had decided. I did it slowly, not because I wanted drama, but because every word mattered. The company would not be transferred that night. It would not be transferred under the current structure at any point in the near future. The portfolio at the head of the table was obsolete. Daniel flinched when I said that word. I told him I had spoken to Gerald and had a revised plan. Hargrave and Sons would move into a management trust. Daniel would remain president of operations, with a salary and real authority over day-to-day decisions, but ownership would transfer incrementally over 10 years tied to performance benchmarks, ethical compliance, debt transparency, and review by a board of 3 independent advisors. Any refinancing of company assets would require board approval and my written consent while I live. Any relocation of headquarters, sale of regional offices, or alteration of core ownership structure would be restricted. Daniel sat very still. Elise's face had gone pale. Regarding the debt, I said, and the word landed between us like a tool dropped onto concrete. I will pay it in full. Principal, interest, penalties, all of it. Elise made a sound, not quite a sob. Daniel looked at me as if I had struck him. I continued before either could speak. In exchange, Elise will sign a postnuptial agreement prepared by my attorney, clearly separating company assets from personal liability and preventing any claim, direct or indirect, against Hargrave and Sons in the event of future financial distress, divorce, creditor action, or estate dispute. She has no obligation to sign it, but if she does not sign, the payoff offer is withdrawn. Daniel began, "Dad, you do not have to." I looked at him and he stopped. "Do not insult me by telling me what I have to do. You lost the right to frame this decision. I am doing this because your mother would have found a way to protect the family without leaving the company exposed. I am doing this because destruction is easy, and I have spent my life building things that do not collapse just because someone made a bad decision. I am also doing this with my eyes open. Do not mistake mercy for trust." Those words changed the room more than anger would have. Elise began to cry then, quietly at first, one hand pressed to her mouth. Daniel stared at the table. I let them sit with it. I did not soften it. A pressure cycle ended there, but it did not release into peace. It released into the heavier knowledge that we would all continue living after this. And continuing is sometimes more brutal than an ending. Elise asked if she could read the agreement. I said she would have it Monday. She asked if I hated her. The question came from a small place, and for a moment I saw how young she must have been when she first learned to hide panic behind competence. I did not answer quickly. "No," I said finally, "but I do not trust you." She nodded as if that was worse. It was. Daniel asked if Anna would know. I said not from me, unless the situation required it legally or operationally. He closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. I said, "Do not thank me yet. Gratitude is easy. The night consequences are reduced. Show me in a year. Show me in 5. Show me when I am not in the room." He nodded. We sat there until the candles burned lower. No one ate the lemon tart. Eventually they stood to leave. At the door, Elise turned back and said, "Richard, I am sorry." I believed her in that moment, and belief did not heal anything. Daniel hugged me, but it was not the same as when he arrived. He held me carefully, like a man handling something he had cracked. I let him. I did not hug him back with both arms. I could feel him notice. That small cruelty, if it was cruelty, was the truth my body told before my mouth could soften it. After they left, I sat on the back porch with the last of the wine and looked at the yard in the dark. The oak tray moved in a small wind. Somewhere beyond the fence, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. The house behind me was clean, warm, full of dishes that needed washing, and a table still arranged for a celebration that had become an autopsy. I thought of Evelyn. I imagined telling her everything, imagined her sitting beside me with her feet tucked under her, listening without interrupting until the end. I do not know what she would have said first. Maybe she would have been furious. People remember kind women as soft, but Evelyn's anger when it came had precision. She might have said Daniel needs to understand what he nearly destroyed. She might have said Elise needs help before shame turns her into someone worse. She might have said pay the debt, but put iron around the company. She might have put her hand over mine and said, "Richard, do not let pain make you proud." That was the sentence I kept hearing, though I do not know whether it came from her memory or from the version of her I built to survive. I also thought about the anonymous caller. I could not identify her with certainty, but I had enough instinct to suspect Miriam. I did not try to prove it. Proof would have forced a conversation that might put her in danger. Instead, late Sunday night, I wrote a card in my own hand and placed it on her desk before anyone arrived Monday morning. No signature. Just one sentence. "Your integrity does not go unnoticed." It never has. I stood in her office for a moment after setting it down. A photo of her grandchildren sat beside her monitor. A small ceramic bird held paper clips. Ordinary things. Brave things are often done by people with ordinary desks. Monday arrived with the strange quality of a world continuing after a private disaster. Elise signed the postnuptial agreement the following week, after independent counsel reviewed it. I insisted on that. If this was going to hold, it had to be clean. No pressure that could later be called coercion. No hidden clause. No emotional ambush. She came to Nathan's office wearing a gray dress and no jewelry except her wedding ring. Daniel came with her but did not sit at the table while her attorney reviewed the terms. That mattered. When she signed, her hand shook once. I watched the pen move across the line and felt no triumph. Relief, perhaps. Sadness, certainly. The payoff was made through escrow directly to the lender. Gerald reviewed the release. Nathan confirmed no residual claims. The wolves at the door were paid and sent away. Debt can disappear with a wire transfer. The shame it creates does not live so efficiently. Daniel signed the revised management trust documents 2 days later. He read every page. That too mattered. He asked questions. He challenged one benchmark, not to avoid accountability, but to make the performance criteria more operationally realistic. I granted the revision because he was right. That may sound small, but it was the first time after Saturday that I saw the executive I had intended to trust before I saw the son who had betrayed me. We appointed the advisory board over the next month. Lewis agreed after calling me a stubborn old bastard and making me promise the meetings would not involve fancy sandwiches. Miriam was promoted quietly to Director of Financial Controls. She did not thank me in person. She sent a short email that said only, "I will do the work well." I printed it and put it in a file. The middle months after the dinner were heavier than the dinner itself. People think confrontation is the hard part because it has words and visible stakes. They are wrong. The hard part is the slow daily aftermath. The ordinary meetings where your son presents quarterly numbers and you hear working on it beneath his voice. The family brunch where Elise passes you coffee and you remember her handwriting reducing you to R. the company anniversary planning call where someone suggests Daniel give the toast, and your stomach tightens before your mind can agree. Trust does not rebuild like a wall. It regrows like nerve tissue, painfully and imperfectly, sometimes sending sensation where there should be none, sometimes numb where you expect feeling. Daniel showed up early. Too early at first, almost performatively. His truck would be in the lot before mine, and I would see the office lights on and feel both pride and irritation. He met with Lewis on site without asking me to join. He walked projects in weather. He stopped using certain phrases in meetings, phrases like "when I take over" and "after the transfer," replacing them with "if the board approves" and "over time." Some people noticed, some did not. Elise began therapy. I only know because Daniel told me once, not in detail, just as a fact offered without a plea for credit. She also took a financial literacy course through a private advisor, which struck me as both absurd and necessary. She wrote me a letter 6 weeks after the agreement. 3 pages, no excuses, no request for forgiveness. She described fear as a room that got smaller each time she lied. She said she had mistaken my silence for distance and Daniel's loyalty for permission. She said the worst line in her plan was not the money, but the initial. I read that sentence 4 times. I did not answer the letter for 2 months. During those months, the company itself became a place of pressure and testing. The advisory board's first major decision involved a risky acquisition Daniel supported, and I opposed. Before Saturday, I might have fought him privately, then decided whether to let him try. After Saturday, everything had a shadow. Was his appetite for risk ambition, fear, or proof that he could be trusted again? We sat in the boardroom for 3 hours, while rain hit the windows and the city blurred grey behind him. Lewis thought the acquisition would stretch labor capacity. Miriam questioned the debt assumptions. Nathan raised liability concerns. Daniel defended the plan without arrogance, then listened, revised, and finally withdrew the proposal himself. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind. He stood at the window with both hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly forward, and for a second I saw the boy in the tiny hard hat. I almost went to him. Instead, I gathered my papers. He said I would have pushed that through a year ago. I said yes. He turned. Did you think I was doing that because of what happened? I said I did not know. That is the problem. He absorbed it without defending himself. Then he nodded. Fair. That word, spoken without resentment, did more for me than any apology. It did not heal the break, but it showed me he could stand near it without trying to cover it. Elise changed more quietly and perhaps more painfully. At family gatherings, she stopped managing the room so efficiently. At first, this made everyone uncomfortable. Her polish had been a kind of social infrastructure, and without it there were gaps. She no longer filled every silence. She no longer redirected Daniel when he stumbled in conversation. She no longer anticipated my needs in ways that had once made me feel cared for and now felt like strategy. One Sunday, months later, she came to the house with Daniel for lunch and stood in the kitchen holding a dish she had made herself badly. The edges were burned. She laughed once, embarrassed, and said, "I almost bought something and pretended." Then I thought I should probably stop doing that kind of thing. It was the closest thing to humor we had shared since before the files. I looked at the burned dish and said Evelyn burned bread the first year we were married, and blamed the oven for 20 years. Elise smiled, and for a moment there was warmth. Then it passed. Warmth after betrayal is dangerous, because part of you wants to crawl into it and call the cold over. I did not. I carried the dish to the table. We ate. It tasted slightly charred. No one said so. People ask me sometimes, or they would if I told the full truth publicly, whether I regret giving Daniel a chance to keep his role in the company, whether I should have fired him, disinherited him, stripped his name from the door, made a lesson of him so severe no one would ever confuse mercy with weakness. I have asked myself those questions more often than I admit. I asked them driving home late after board meetings. I asked them standing in the shower with hot water running over my neck. I asked them on Evelyn's birthday, when grief always makes judgment harder. The answer changes in texture, but not in substance. My son is not a villain. He is a man who let fear, first his wife's and then his own, override everything I had ever taught him about honesty. That sentence contains both condemnation and hope. He is also a man who has shown up since then, earlier than anyone's, later than necessary. He has earned respect from people who were not told, why they needed to watch him more closely. He has not once asked me to accelerate the trust timeline. He has not tried to flatter me into comfort. Some mornings he looks at me with a sadness that says he understands forgiveness is not a document anyone can sign. Whatever else he is my son. He has my face, Evelyn's restraint, my mother's stubbornness, and 42 years of memories that belong to both of us. I was not willing to burn all of that down. I was also not willing to hand him matches again. I also think about what Evelyn would have done with Elise. Evelyn had a practical mercy that used to frustrate me. She believed consequences should teach, not merely punish. She would have paid the debt, I think, but she would have sat Elise at the kitchen table afterward and asked questions that left no place to hide. Evelyn could make silence feel like daylight. I am slower to forgiveness than she was. I always have been, but I am getting there. Or at least I am moving in the direction where forgiveness might someday be visible. I answered Elise's letter after 2 months. My reply was shorter than hers. I wrote that I believed her remorse was real, but that remorse is not repair. I wrote that I did not want performances of humility, only consistent truth. I wrote that she had not only endangered money, but had participated in turning Daniel away from the honest road, and that she would need to live with the fact that I now watched her through that knowledge. Then I wrote one sentence I almost removed. I am glad you are still here to do better. She cried when she read it, Daniel told me later. I did not ask how he knew. I did not ask what she said. Some privacy is necessary even in damaged families, maybe especially then. The leather portfolio is still on my desk. Nathan tells me I should return it to the file cabinet, that leaving obsolete documents out is a habit from a plan that no longer applies. He is right legally and wrong psychologically. I leave it there on purpose. Some mornings I walk past it and feel nothing. Some mornings I put my hand on the cover and remember the man I was before the anonymous call. The man who stood at the kitchen window and read Daniel's text with simple fatherly pride. The man who bought a bracelet for Elise because he believed belonging could be welcomed with gold and engraving. I do not hate that man. That is important. He was not stupid. He was loving. But love without structure can become a door people walk through carrying knives. The portfolio reminds me of that. It reminds me that trust is not a permanent condition. It is a structure that must be inspected, maintained, reinforced, and sometimes redesigned after load has shifted. There are mornings when the feeling it gives me has no plain name. Not grief, not anger, something quieter. The feeling of discovering a locked room inside your own house and realizing someone you love has been using it for months. The company celebrated its 42nd anniversary last month. We held the party in the main conference room because I refused the ballroom Daniel suggested. Cake, speeches, coffee, old photographs running on a screen, including the one of Daniel in the tiny yellow hard hat. I almost asked them to remove it. I did not. History does not become false because the future disappoints it. Lewis gave a short speech that began with a complaint about the coffee and ended with half the room wiping their eyes. Miriam stood near the back, arms folded, watching everything with her quiet, precise gaze. Elise attended but stayed mostly beside Daniel, not performing, not floating through the room with the old effortless control. Anna flew in from Portland and hugged me too long, which told me she knew more than I had told her, or perhaps simply knew me well enough to feel the missing boards under the floor. Daniel gave the final toast. He stood at the front of the room with a glass of sparkling water because he said he wanted a clear head, and for once I did not wonder whether the gesture was staged. He talked about what the company meant, not as an asset but as a responsibility. He named employees. He named mistakes the company had survived. He named his mother and paused long enough that the silence felt earned. Then he looked at me. Not quickly, not for show. He held my gaze and said, "My father built this company by showing up every day, especially when showing up cost him something. I am learning that inheritance is not receiving what someone built. It is becoming worthy of carrying what someone still has the grace not to take away from you." The room went quiet, not the shocked silence of exposure, the listening silence of people recognizing something true without knowing its full history. I nodded once. It was not a performance. It was two people who knew the same true thing. You can damage something without destroying it, and deciding not to destroy it is a choice that has to be made every day, not just once. After the party, I drove home alone the long way, through the old neighborhood where Hargrave and Sons began in a rented office with 2 employees, a second-hand truck, and a sign I painted myself because paying someone else seemed irresponsible. The building is a tax preparation office now. The parking lot has been repaved. The old loading door is gone. I almost did not stop, then did. I sat in the car for a few minutes and looked at the door that used to have our name on it. The street was busier than it had been back then. A taco place on the corner, apartments where the machine shop used to be. A cyclist rolled past with a backpack square on his shoulders. I thought about the first payroll I nearly missed. Evelyn sitting at our kitchen table with a calculator and a pencil, moving numbers around until survival appeared. I thought about Daniel at 6, asleep in a chair in my first office because Evelyn had class and the babysitter cancelled. I thought about the anonymous woman's voice. I thought about Elise's handwriting. I thought about the $480, $0 paid away like blood money to save a family from a wound it had created itself. And under all of that, I thought I built something real. Whatever anyone tried to do with it, whatever almost happened, none of that changes what I built, but the thought no longer gave me the clean satisfaction it once might have. Real things can be damaged. Real things can stand and still carry cracks. I started the car and drove home. The oak tree was lit gold in the late sun when I pulled into the driveway. I sat there a moment before going inside. The house looked warm from the outside. Lights in the kitchen, porch shadow across the steps, the back field darkening behind it. It was the same house where Evelyn had laughed, where Daniel had once run through the hall with muddy shoes, where Anna had read books under the dining table, where Elise had sat and lied by omission, where I had placed a folder between candles and asked for honesty. A house can hold all of that without choosing among it. People cannot. I went inside and stood in the entryway listening to the silent, not peaceful silence, not anymore. Something colder, more honest. Survival has a sound if you listen closely. It is not applause. It is not relief. It is the hum of a refrigerator, the settling of wood in cooling air, the old ache in your knee as you climb the stairs, the knowledge that tomorrow you will wake up and still be the man who knows what he knows. I went to my study. The leather portfolio waited on the desk. I touched the cover once, then I turned off the lamp and left it in the dark. I have thought a lot about the word inheritance since that Saturday dinner. We use it to mean what gets passed down: money, property, shares, names on buildings. The kind of things lawyers can reduce to paper and families can ruin themselves trying to receive. But sitting at my own table that night, watching my son struggle to find words for what he had done, I understood that the most important things I had ever tried to pass down to him were not in that leather portfolio at all. They were in every conversation about honesty, every job site where I made him apologize to a laborer he had spoken to carelessly, every time I told him numbers matter because people stand behind them, every time I said, when you make a mistake, you come to me before it becomes a lie. Those were the things I had given him, and those were the things he had chosen not to use when fear entered the room. That is the part that stayed with me longest, not the scheme itself, not the loan documents, not the handwritten plan with my name reduced to a single letter. At some point, my son had stood at a fork in the road and picked the longer, darker path, while the shorter, honest one stood open beside him. People do not always do that out of cruelty. More often they do it out of fear, pride, shame, and the fatal hope that the easier lie will hold long enough to matter. It never does. It held for 14 months in his case, and then one phone call from a woman with enough integrity to risk her own position undid all of it in 3 seconds. I think about that woman often. Miriam, if it was Miriam. The caller did not know what I would do with what she gave me. She had no guarantee I would believe her, no guarantee I would act, no guarantee I would protect her if the truth came back through the building looking for someone to punish. She called anyway. That is moral courage in its least decorated form. Not certainty, not a guarantee of outcome, not a speech, just the decision to tell the truth, because the truth matters more than the comfort of staying silent. I have tried to carry that with me. I have not always succeeded. There are days when silence still feels easier. There are days when looking directly at damage feels like inviting more damage. But I am trying. What I did at the dinner table was not dramatic. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten to disinherit anyone. I did not open the folder and throw pages across the table like a man in a movie. I set it down and asked for honesty, and I meant it. There is a kind of authority that only comes from having already decided what you will do regardless of what the other person says. I had decided I was not there to punish Daniel. I was there to tell him I know, and now we choose what happens next. That was the only real power I had, and I used it as calmly as I could. Wisdom is not what you know. It is what you do when what you know costs you something. I knew my son had betrayed my trust. What that knowledge cost me, what it still costs me on certain mornings when I see his name on a report or hear his voice through a conference room door, is not something I can put a number on. But wisdom meant I did not let that cost turn into destruction. I paid Elise's debt because keeping the family from falling into the hands of predators was worth more than the satisfaction of watching consequences arrive cleanly. I restructured the trust because Daniel is still capable of becoming the man I raised him to be, but capability is not entitlement, and love is not blindness. Those were not soft decisions. They were the hardest ones I have ever made. Harder than signing payroll when cash was tight. Harder than closing offices during the recession. Harder than standing beside Evelyn's hospital bed after the machines went quiet. Because those decisions had enemies outside me. This one had the enemy at my own table, wearing my son's face. I made the choice with my eyes open, and that is why the ending is not clean. The company still bears my name. My son still comes to work every day. Elise still sits across from me at family meals sometimes, quieter now, and I still sometimes see her handwriting when she lifts a fork. The leather portfolio still waits on my desk. The bracelet remains in the drawer, unopened, useless. A little gold circle engraved for a version of belonging that no longer exists. I have not returned it. I do not know why. Maybe because some evidence is too private for files. Some victories do not look like victories. They do not end with applause or punishment or a clean restoration of what was lost. Sometimes they look like a man sitting alone in his own driveway at the end of an ordinary day, still standing, still wounded, still unwilling to let the wound make him cruel. Sometimes they look like a father nodding at a son across a crowded conference room, because both of them know the nod is not forgiveness, not yet, but permission to keep earning the chance. Sometimes they look like a company continuing to operate, while everyone inside it believes the anniversary party was only an anniversary party. Sometimes they look like an old leather portfolio left in the dark on purpose, a silent witness to the life that almost changed hands too easily. I am 63 years old. My knees still ache. My doctor still tells me to slow down. Daniel still has my face. Evelyn is still gone. The backfield still fills with morning light as if nothing has happened, and I still sometimes turn to tell her about it before remembering. I built something real. I protected it. I protected my son from the full ruin of his own fear, and I protected myself from the stupidity of pretending nothing had happened. That is not relief. That is not healing. It is only the ground beneath my feet, cracked but holding. For now, that has to be enough.